"You don't belong in this program." He said it in front of the seminar, not loudly, not with visible cruelty, but with the particular flatness of a man who has decided that the statement is self-evident and requires no modulation to deliver. He handed back her midterm. The grade was written at the top in red without comment. 38. Around the table, 15 other students stared at their own returned papers, or found great interest in the middle distance. The kind of silence that settles when a room full of people has collectively decided not to witness something they are not going to intervene in. You may want to consider whether this field of study is the right fit for your abilities. She took the paper. She folded it. She put it in her bag, a worn green backpack that she had carried since high school, stuffed with notebooks and printed papers and a thick legal folder that had been in there for 3 weeks, riding around with her to every class and every library and every coffee shop where she had sat with it closed on the table, waiting for the right moment that she had not yet decided had arrived. She looked at him. Not with anger, not with appeal, with a patience that was very old for a 19-year-old face. Then she said, "Thank you, Professor." She put on her backpack and stood. "I'll speak with the dean this afternoon." She walked out of the seminar. He watched her go with the expression of a man who has just handled something efficiently. He had not handled anything efficiently. He had just pulled the thread that would unravel 22 years of careful concealment. By Thursday, he would know it. By the following Monday, the dean would have sent the letter. By the end of the semester, his name would have left the door of his office and the roster of the university faculty and the 3 professional associations to which he had belonged, and the paper that bore his name as sole author on a foundational methodology in his field would have been retracted, corrected, and reattributed, in the formal language of the journal's correction notice, to its original and actual author. Have you ever watched arrogance hand someone the exact tool needed to dismantle it? Stay with this story, because what happened in Professor Wendell Carrick's Thursday seminar is the kind of story that requires you to understand what was in that backpack before you can understand anything else. Go back. 3 weeks earlier, her name was Amara O.C. She was 19 years old, the first in her family to attend a research university, the daughter of 2 school teachers from a mid-sized city who had raised her on the specific conviction that knowledge was not a gift but a discipline, that the world would not hand her anything, but that the world, approached with sufficient precision and patience, would eventually yield what her effort deserved. She was a freshman in the university's computational methods program, a highly competitive, technically demanding field that she had chosen not for prestige but because she had been genuinely deeply fascinated by it since she was 13, when she had worked through a problem in a library book that she was not supposed to be old enough to understand and had solved it anyway, incorrectly but creatively, and then spent 4 months figuring out where she had gone wrong and another 2 figuring out a better approach. She had come to the university with a portfolio of independent work accumulated over 5 years. Her high school had been underfunded, and her teachers had been outmatched by the scope of her interests, and so she had, out of necessity, taught herself, through papers she found online, through forums where she disguised her age, through a local engineer at a manufacturing company who had noticed her questions at a community science event and agreed to answer her emails for 2 years, patiently and thoroughly, because he recognized in the questions the signature of a genuinely exceptional mind. His name was Frederick Owusu. He would, much later, be one of 3 people who testified in the University Review. She arrived at the university with one project she was particularly proud of, a methodology she had developed independently over the course of 8 months, a framework for optimizing a class of signal processing problems that she had worked out from first principles, documented meticulously, and submitted for provisional patent protection through the university's undergraduate innovation program in October, 3 weeks before Professor Carrick's Thursday seminar handed back the midterm with a 38 at the top. She had not chosen this program by accident. She had chosen it because Professor Wendell Carrick's foundational work, the paper that had established his reputation in the field, was cited on the program's own website as a defining contribution. She had read the paper before applying. She had read it twice. She had noted, the second time, something that she could not immediately explain, a structural similarity between the methodology in that paper and the methodology she had developed herself, independently, over the previous year. She had set the observation aside. She had assumed coincidence. She had arrived at university prepared to learn from a man whose paper she had read and respected. On the 3rd week of the seminar, Professor Carrick had presented, as an example of elegant current methodology in the field, a framework for signal processing optimization. He had not attributed it to anyone. He had presented it as standard current practice. She had recognized it immediately, not as standard practice, as her framework with modest variations that could be explained as natural development or as the imprecision of a summary delivered without the original in hand. She had not said anything. She had gone home and read the paper again, the foundational paper that had built Carrick's reputation, with her own documentation open beside it. She had spent 2 days comparing them. The parallels were not structural similarities. They were, at the resolution she was now examining, the same methodology. Carrick's paper had been published 22 years ago. Her documentation was 8 months old. There was no question of who had come first in time. The question, the one she needed to determine precisely before she said anything to anyone, was whether the parallel was coincidence or something else. She spent 3 weeks in the library. She tracked the sourcing in Carrick's paper backward through the citations. She found one citation that led nowhere, a conference paper from a year before publication that could not be located in any database, that appeared to be the origin of the methodology in Carrick's work. She made a formal request to the university library for the conference proceedings. The library told her the proceedings were not in the collection. She made a request to the conference organizers, who had since dissolved. She contacted 3 researchers who had attended the conference, 2 of whom replied. Neither could recall the cited paper. One had never heard of the author. The cited author did not exist. The citation was fabricated. She put the documentation in a legal folder in her green backpack and went to class every week and waited for the right moment. She was not waiting out of strategy or theater. She was waiting out of the instilled caution of her parents, who had raised her to be absolutely sure before she said anything consequential. She was sure. She wanted to be surer. By the time the midterm came back with 38 at the top and "You don't belong in this program" delivered in front of 15 witnesses, she had 3 weeks of documentation and a provisional patent with a university timestamp and a library request record and 2 researcher replies and a dead citation trail. She walked out of the seminar. She went to the dean's office that afternoon. She asked for 30 minutes. She sat across from the dean and opened the backpack and set the folder on the desk and explained what she had found, methodically and without emotion, the way her parents had taught her to present something that the facts themselves would argue if she simply organized them clearly. She spoke for 26 minutes. She answered 4 questions. She left the folder with the dean and went to study for her other courses. The university review process took 11 weeks. It involved 3 external researchers, a forensic citation analysis, a review of Carrick's archived research materials from the period preceding publication, and a formal interview with Frederick Owusu, who confirmed the timeline of Amara's work in detail. The review found that the methodology in Carrick's foundational paper could not be independently sourced, and that the fabricated citation was the only documentation of its origin. The review found that Amara's provisional patent, filed with the university's own innovation program and time-stamped in their own system, constituted an independent development of the same methodology that could not be attributed to Carrick's influence, given the timeline and the specificity of her documentation. The findings were submitted to the journal that had published Carrick's paper. The journal conducted its own review. The correction notice, published 11 months after Amara's afternoon visit to the dean's office, formally retracted Carrick's sole attribution and acknowledged the methodology as an independent and primary development, noting with scholarly language that the original citation upon which the paper had relied could not be verified. The correction notice did not, in its formal language, accuse Carrick of fabrication. The professional association's reviews and Carrick's letter of departure from the university did not need to use the word either. The record, when assembled, said what it said without assistance. Amara Osi completed her freshman year with a grade point average that needed no defense. She returned the following fall. She is currently in her 3rd year of the program, which has since revised its admissions review process and its appeals procedure and its faculty oversight protocol. None of the revisions used her name in their implementation documentation. She preferred it that way. Frederick Owusu attended her sophomore year presentation, where she presented the methodology, her methodology, now with her name on it, to the department's annual research symposium. He sat in the 3rd row. He did not applaud more than anyone else. He had taught her to let the work speak. He trusted she remembered. If this story reached something in you, if it reminded you of what it looks like when rigor becomes protection, when precision becomes the thing that saves you in the room where you were supposed to be dismissed, share it, and tell me, have you ever known something, documented it carefully, waited for the right moment, and found that the moment came in a way you didn't expect? Leave that in the comments. I want to read every word. Here is what really gets me. Not the retraction or the correction notice or the departure from the faculty. What gets me is the 3 weeks she carried that folder. 3 weeks in a green backpack to every class, every library, every coffee shop, including every Thursday to the seminar where the man whose work she was quietly, meticulously, completely dismantling stood at the front of the room and told her that this field was perhaps not the right fit for her abilities. She sat in that room for 3 weeks with the documentation on her back and said nothing. Not because she was afraid, not because she was unsure, because her parents had raised her to be absolutely certain before she said anything consequential, and she was using the 3 weeks to be certain. Here is my question. When you think about the 15 other students in that seminar, the ones who stared at their papers, who found the middle distance interesting, who declined to witness, what do you think they knew? Not about the patent or the citation or the methodology. What did they know about the grade, about the pattern, about whether a 38 and you don't belong here was a first occurrence or a practiced one? And here is the harder question. If one of them had spoken that Thursday, what would have happened? What does it cost a room full of people to be quiet, and who pays that cost, and who decides the cost is worth paying? She was 19. She had a folder on her back. She had 5 years of discipline that was more rigorous than anything in that seminar. She had built the methodology that built his career independently from scratch, because that was the kind of mind she had, and that was what her parents had taught her to do with it. She did not need anyone in that room to speak. She had what she needed. But the room's silence is still its own record, still its own thing that happened and will not unhappen. Documents record everything, eventually, including who chose not to speak. She went to the dean's office, she opened the backpack, she set the folder on the desk, she let the work speak. It spoke clearly. It has been speaking ever since. Let me tell you about the patent itself, because it matters in ways that the story of its origin does not fully capture. The methodology Amara had developed, the one that she had worked through from first principles over 8 months, that she had documented in the meticulous way her parents had taught her to document things worth protecting, was not merely elegant. It was efficient in a way that existing approaches in the field were not. It reduced the computational complexity of a class of signal processing problems by an order of magnitude under certain conditions. The researchers who reviewed it during the university's investigation noted in their written assessment that it represented a genuine and significant advance, not merely a refinement of existing work, but a substantively different approach that opened new directions in the field. 2 of those researchers contacted her afterward. One asked if she had considered graduate school. The other asked if she would be willing to present the work at a conference. She said yes to both. The conference presentation was her first. She was 20 years old. She stood at the front of a room of researchers, most of them 2 to 4 decades older than her, and she presented her methodology in the same methodical, unemotional way she had presented it to the dean, letting the structure of the argument carry the weight rather than performing its significance. She answered questions for 45 minutes afterward. The 45 minutes became 60. She was still answering questions when the next scheduled presenter knocked on the door of the room. She was aware, throughout all of this, that the story being told in the field, the correction notice, the retraction, the circumstances that had led her to document her work and bring it to the dean, was present in that room in ways she could not fully see. People knew. They had read the correction notice. They had their own thoughts about what it meant. She chose not to address any of it directly. She presented the work. She answered questions about the work. She let the work carry itself the way her parents and Frederick Owusu had taught her that good work, eventually, always does. Frederick Owusu was not at that conference. He had retired from the manufacturing company the previous year and was spending more time with his grandchildren in a city 3 states away. He received a copy of her presentation materials in the mail with a handwritten note. The note said, "You answered my emails for 2 years. I wanted you to see where they went." He read the materials on his porch over 2 evenings and wrote her back a long letter that she has kept, folded inside the cover of the same green backpack, which she still carries. The backpack is more worn now than it was when she walked out of Carrick's seminar. She has been offered a new one by her department as part of a graduate student supply stipend. She has declined. The backpack goes where she goes. It has carried everything that matters so far, and she sees no reason to stop trusting it. The university's revised faculty oversight protocol, implemented quietly without press release in the year following the review, includes a provision for anonymous third-party review of grading patterns in advanced seminars triggered by a deviation threshold across demographic lines. It is a bureaucratic provision, dry and technical, the kind of thing that appears in university policy documents without any name attached. It was recommended by the external review panel. It exists now. Students who come after Amara Ose into that department will be protected by a provision that has no name on it but has a very clear origin. That is how institutional change works when it works. Quietly, embedded in policy, invisible to anyone who does not know where to look and what it cost someone to put it there. Carrick's foundational paper, retracted and reattributed, is now cited in the field primarily as a methodological case study, an example used in research ethics courses to discuss the obligations of scholarly attribution and the particular institutional vulnerabilities that allow fabricated citations to persist undetected for decades. It is assigned reading in at least 4 graduate programs. Students read it alongside the correction notice and Amara's original documentation. She did not ask for this. The courses were designed without her input. She found out about one of them when a student emailed her with a question about the timeline. She answered the question. She mentioned at the end of the email that she thought the course sounded worthwhile. She had never wanted to be a corrective case study. She had wanted to do her work. She is still doing it. The methodology has been extended and applied in 3 adjacent fields, each application with her name on the foundational citations, each citation a small and permanent record of a 19-year-old who had sat through 3 weeks of a seminar with her documentation on her back and her parents' voice in her head saying, "Be certain before you say anything consequential." She was certain. She went to the dean. She set the folder on the desk. She let the work speak. The work is still speaking. That is, in the end, the only thing that ever matters. Not the grade at the top of the midterm, not the dismissal in front of 15 witnesses, not the flatness of the voice that said, "You don't belong in this program." Those things exist in the permanent record too, but they are the record of someone else's failure. What Amara carries, what is in her green backpack and her patent documentation and the letter on her porch and the citations that multiply through the field with her name on them, is the record of someone who was told no and brought the documentation that said otherwise. She brought it quietly, precisely, and with the particular patience of a person raised to understand that the truth is not diminished by being kept in a backpack for 3 weeks, that the truth does not require noise to arrive, that it only requires someone willing to carry it carefully until the door opens and the folder can be placed on the desk. She placed it. The door opened. The work did what good work does. It stayed and it grew and it became part of the permanent record of the field, attached to her name, going nowhere. The parents are the story. Without 2 school teachers who taught their daughter that knowledge was a discipline, that the world would not hand her anything but approached with precision and patience would yield what her effort deserved. The folder is empty. Her father taught high school mathematics. Her mother taught 7th grade language arts. Neither had published a paper. What they had was a conviction so consistent it functioned like a law. Do the work correctly. Document it. Be certain before you speak. Let it carry itself. Amara absorbed it the way children absorb what their parents do every day without ceremony. She did not know at 13 it would matter enormously at 19. She was just watching her parents do what they did. Carrick did not understand this when he said, "You don't belong in this program." He was not looking at a discourageable freshman. He was looking at the product of 20 years of a family's total commitment to what a person owed to the truth. He had never asked her name. He had decided before she opened her mouth. She opened her backpack instead. The folder she placed on the dean's desk was, if you were willing to look, not just a legal document but the material expression of everything her parents had built in her: precision, patience, certainty, the refusal to say anything consequential before she was ready to say it completely. The dean asked 4 questions. She answered them. The folder did the rest. Her parents attended her conference presentation the year after, sitting in the back row. Her mother had the abstract folded in her purse. Her father had the correction notice in his jacket pocket. Neither had mentioned bringing documents to the other. They had simply both brought them, because they were people who documented what mattered. After the presentation, her father leaned over and said, "She sounds like herself." Her mother agreed. They listened for 60 minutes without another word. The work was speaking. They had spent 20 years making sure she knew how to carry it to a room and set it down. There is a specific knowledge that accumulates in people seriously underestimated, not bitterness, something more durable. A precise understanding of exactly how dismissal works, which words it uses, how it positions itself as neutral professional judgment. Amara now teaches a seminar of her own at a different institution. She covers computational methodology and grades rigorous work rigorously. Returns papers with specific, honest comments, written with the memory of a person who received a 38 with no comment except a dismissal. She grades the way her parents raised her to do everything, correctly. Her students know some version of the story. It is in the field now, in the correction notice, in the citations, in the research ethics curriculum of 4 graduate programs. She has never addressed it directly in seminar. She mentioned it once in office hours to a student who came in shaken by a grade they believed was unjust. She said, "Document everything. Date it. Keep it. Do not say anything consequential until you are certain, then bring it to whoever needs to receive it and let it speak." The student asked, "What if it doesn't work?" She said, "Then you have a record. A record is never nothing. It is proof you were here and did not simply accept what you were told you were. Keep it regardless. Keep it for whoever walks in behind you." That is what the green backpack carries. It is worn from every class, every conference, every office hour and late library night where the work needed to be present for whenever the moment came. The moment always comes. You have to be carrying the right thing when it does. She is still carrying it. The work is in it still, speaking clearly and without argument, long after Carrick's name has faded from the field. She opened the backpack. She placed the folder carefully on the desk. She let the work speak. That is all. That has always been enough.